Complain, 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 complain. Most people think that complaining is totally harmless, but it's not. We call it venting, we call it processing, we call it being honest. And I'm not saying this from a place of judgment because believe me, I have not always had this figured out. And it's not that I never complain. Sometimes I catch myself. But for a long time, complaining was just how I moved through the world. It was normal to me. It was familiar. In fact, it was the set point of my nervous system. I grew up in a household where chaos and trauma and insanity and instability were just the norm for me. It was the constant. And complaining was the anchor of conversation in my household. It's how stress was released. It's how connection happened. It's how emotions moved through the household. So, of course, because I didn't know better, I carried that into my adulthood. And I complained about everything. I complained about my health, about my job, about my circumstances, my husband, my kids, everybody in my life. And at the time, I just didn't know any better. So I can give myself a lot of grace now when I look back on that. Complaining wasn't something that I was intentionally choosing. Well, it kind of was. It was just something that my nervous system had learned. And that's why I want to talk about this today with a lot of grace. Because this episode is not about shaming yourself for complaining. It's about becoming aware of something that most people never stop to question. Because here's the part that most people miss. Welcome to Rewired and Unstoppable. I'm Tammy Anderson, and this is where belief rewiring meets nervous system regulation, so you can create the health, success, happiness, and joy you want in every area of your life. Let's get into it. Complaining doesn't just describe your reality. It trains your nervous system to keep recreating that. Because here's what complaining actually is when you really strip it down to its core. Complaining is sustained focus on what you don't want. Let me say that again. Complaining is sustained focus on what you don't want. And your nervous system and your brain don't register that as, oh, she's just talking, she's just venting. It's registered as, this is important. Pay attention to this. Prepare for more of this. Create more of this. What you focus on becomes the signal. The signal becomes your internal state. And that state becomes your lived experience. So when you're complaining about your job, your body is preparing for more frustration at work. When you're complaining about your health, whatever symptoms you're struggling with, your system is rehearsing for more symptoms. When you're complaining about money, relationships, the economy, or how unfair life feels for you right now, your nervous system is orienting towards lack, threat, and vigilance. So you're not just describing what's wrong, you are training your system over and over and over again to keep looking for more of that thing that you don't actually want. And that's the part that changes everything once you see it, because it's not that wanting something different is wrong. I mean, we should always want more or better than what we're having, right? There's always more to reach for. So it's not that you shouldn't desire more. It's that when all of your attention is locked onto what you don't want, you are unintentionally creating more of that thing. And once you see that, really see it, not just from an intellectual concept, but internalize it, it really changes everything for you. So if you ever found yourself stuck in the same patterns, having the same conversations, feeling like life keeps giving you different versions of the same problem over and over and over again, this episode is for you. So let's talk about what actually is happening in your body when you complain, because this is where things really click. Your nervous system doesn't experience thoughts or words as neutral. It experiences them as information. And it's constantly asking one simple question. Is this safe or is it not safe? Right? And when you complain, especially when you complain repeatedly about the same things, your nervous system isn't hearing, oh, we're just venting. It's hearing, this is a problem, this matters, stay alert, hold your breath, tighten your muscles, brace yourself, right? So your body responds accordingly. Your muscles tense up, your breath gets shallow, you get a headache, you get dizzy, you get a pain in your stomach. Stress hormones release, your perception narrows, you move to what I call your stuck state, because you're stuck, right? Not because you're negative or broken, but because your system is orienting towards threat, right? And when you're in a threat state, you're stuck, you're not safe. And the tricky part is that complaining often feels relieving in the moment. So you say the thing, you feel validated, someone agrees with you, right? And your nervous system goes, oh, connection, that felt good. So it wires it in. Complaining becomes a habit, a default, a way your system tries to regulate itself, even though it's actually doing the opposite of that, right? And over time, that habit keeps you locked into the same emotional states: frustration, resentment, helplessness, anger, shame. And those emotions don't just affect how you feel, they affect how you see the world. So when you're in a stuck state, you don't notice solutions. You don't notice opportunities. You don't notice what's actually already working in your life. You just notice more evidence of what's wrong. And this is why people can change jobs and still be miserable, change relationships and still feel dissatisfied, fix one problem only to immediately find another similar one. Because the external situation changed, but the internal focus didn't. And here's the part I want to say gently, but clearly. It's okay to want something different than what you have. I said that a few minutes ago. That's human. We should. But when your nervous system is trained to constantly scan for what's wrong, it becomes hard to move forward in any area of your life. Your health, your finances, your relationships, anything. And it's not because life is against you. I mean, I used to think that. It's because your attention is working against you. And there's another layer to this that's really, really important to understand. Complaining doesn't just keep you focused on what you don't want. It actually trains your brain to expect the worst. And from a neuroscience perspective, this makes total sense. Your brain evolved long before we had locking doors, central heating, indoor plumbing, grocery stores to get our food from, right? Back then, staying alive depended on one thing: spotting danger before it spotted you. So the brain became really, really good at scanning for threats, always scanning for what could go wrong. What predator is lurking behind a tree ready to pounce on you? How to stay safe and alive in harsh weather. That wiring never went away. The problem is that most of us are no longer facing saber-toothed tigers lurking behind trees. We live in hermetically sealed boxes with climate control that we call houses. We have ample food that we don't have to worry about impending starvation. But our brains don't know that. Our nervous systems don't know that. So when you complain, especially when you repeat the same complaints over and over and over again, tell the same stories, right? You're reinforcing that ancient survival circuitry. You are literally teaching your brain to keep looking for problems, to stay alert, to be vigilant, to prepare for the worst. And once that pattern is in place, it doesn't stop at the original issue. It spreads. And I used to be exceptional at this. I could have been crowned the grand champion complainer. I didn't just complain, I catastrophized. I created scenarios in my mind that were the fisherman's tale of the big fish when it was actually a little tiny one. I made mountains out of molehills. I would create doom and gloom scenarios, like these what if scenarios in my mind about things that might happen to my kids and probably never would. I would replay stories in my head, retell them, analyze them, add more detail, right? Round and round I'd go. And the more doom and gloom movies that I created in my mind about things that might happen in the future, but probably wouldn't, the more that became my reality. And my body reacted as if they already had. And here's the part that changed literally everything for me, like my entire life. I eventually realized that I was using the power of my imagination and creativity all day long. I just wasn't using it very intelligently. Yeah, I just wasn't using it very intelligently, if I'm being totally honest. I was incredibly creative, just in the worst possible direction. And once I understood that I could use that same imagination to create feelings of safety and hope and gratitude and possibility instead of fear, I could make movies in my mind about a future I actually wanted. Everything in my life began to improve. And I mean everything. My health, my relationships, my sense of peace, my confidence, my feelings of belonging and self-worth, my ability to actually experience true joy and happiness. Just in more ways than I ever could have imagined. Because the imagination is always creating something. The question is whether it's creating a future you want or rehearsing one that you don't want. And this is really important to understand. Complaining doesn't just affect your nervous system, it affects the nervous systems of everyone around you. I learned this the hard way. So there's a story I like to tell about one of the greatest gifts I ever received. It was the gift of true kindness, of honesty. So there was a season in my life where, like I told you earlier at the beginning of this episode, complaining was basically my personality. It was how I connected, how I processed, how I bonded. And at the time, I genuinely did not know any other way. So I can look back on that earlier version of myself with a lot of grace. And you should too, if this resonates with you. Complaining was the set point of my household growing up. It was a home filled with incredible chaos and trauma and instability. Complaining wasn't negative, it was just normal. It was what we did. It was like the background music of my childhood. So I carried that into adulthood without ever questioning it. Because we don't usually question these things until something happens in our lives that forces us to self-reflect. So I didn't question it until I lost a really close friend, one who I absolutely cherished. We were besties. We hung out all the time. We talked on the phone every day. We texted back and forth all day. And at first, she just kind of disappeared from my life, just like, as we would say, ghosted me. She stopped responding to any of my calls, any of my texts. And what she was doing is she was deciding not to keep staying nice and keep absorbing my emotional vampire energy. and be kind instead. As harsh as that kind of sounds, I never knew why she disappeared. She was just gone one day. We didn't have an argument. I was so confused. And then months later, when we finally talked, she told me the truth. She told me that being around me felt emotionally exhausting, that she left every single one of our interactions feeling completely drained because I had nothing positive to say about anyone or anything ever. I complained about everything. She told me that I was the angriest person she had ever met in her life, and it stung. And I want to be really clear about something here. She wasn't being cruel at all. She was actually being really kind, because kindness isn't always comfortable. Sometimes kindness looks like holding up a mirror and letting someone decide who they want to be. And I was completely devastated. I was embarrassed. I was defensive. I was ashamed. I cried for 3 straight days and off and on for weeks afterwards. But looking back now, her kindness, her courage to tell me what I really needed to hear at that time, changed the entire trajectory of my life. Because it forced me to ask a question I'd never asked before. Is this how I want to show up in the world? Do I want to be that person who other people turn around and walk the other way when they see me coming? Because they know how negative I'm going to be. Do I want to be the mom and the wife who can never see the good in anything? Do I want my entire identity to be built around what's wrong in the world? Hey, quick pause from the show. If this episode is landing for you, if you're starting to notice how often your mind defaults to what's wrong, what's missing, what's broken, what's not working, what shouldn't be happening, that matters more than you probably realize. So we talk a lot about detoxing these days. Parasites, mold, heavy metals, candida, sugar, alcohol. And yes, I live in the functional medicine world. I run detoxes with my clients all the time. But there is one detox that impacts virtually every area of your life, your health, your relationships, your finances, your connection, your sense of safety in the world. And it's the one that most people never even consider. And it's often why all the other stuff doesn't stick long term. It's the detox of complaining, because that constant mental output keeps your nervous system stuck in stress. And when that happens, nothing truly changes long term. That's why I created the 2-week complaining detox challenge to help you take this awareness and actually put it into practice in real time. So if you want to join us, you'll find it linked in the description below. All right, let's get back to the episode. And like I said a minute ago, I can look back now at that version of myself with so much love and so much grace. I just didn't know any better. I was dysregulated from a lifetime of chaos, a lifetime of uncertainty, a lifetime of trauma. I was exhausted, and I was surviving. I had survived. But awareness changes everything. And once I saw the pattern of what I was doing, I couldn't unsee it. I had to face it. And this is where I see so many people staying stuck. We all know someone like this. Maybe it's a coworker, maybe it's a neighbor, a family member. And maybe if we're being really honest, it's been us, right? That person complains nonstop about their job, how much they hate it, how annoying their coworkers are. And then they lose their job and they complain about being unemployed, right? Well, you hated the job. Now you don't have it and you're still complaining. Then they get a new job and they complain about the new job too. Same pattern, different circumstances. And at some point, you have to be willing to ask, what's the common denominator here, right? Because like I said before, it's okay to want something different. It's okay to desire growth and change and evolution. That's normal. We should all want that. It's okay to want more and want better for yourself, but complaining keeps you energetically anchored to what you don't want, and it trains your nervous system to expect more of the same. Loving your life right now as it is, your body, your relationships, your finances, your job, it doesn't mean you're just settling. It means you are shifting out of survival and into creation and appreciation. And that's when things actually start to change. And this is the part that I really, really want you to hear. Complaining isn't just venting steam. It's not harmless. It doesn't just help you get it out. It locks your attention onto what you don't want. And whatever you consistently focus on grows. You get more of it. When you complain about your health symptoms, you get more health symptoms. When you complain about your weight, you get more weight, or it doesn't go away. When you complain about your relationship stays crappy, and it probably gets crappier. When you complain about money, work, time, the economy, you get more scarcity in those areas. Not because you're being punished, not because life is just unfair. I mean, I used to think that. But because that's what your attention is trained to look for. Your brain becomes a heat-seeking missile for evidence that proves you right. And once it finds more, and more, and more, and more. And over time, that becomes your default way of living. This is how people end up spending most of their lives in what I call the stuck state. Same conversations, same complaints, same problems, different year, the same Groundhog's Day, over and over and over and over again. And it's not because change isn't possible. It's because their focus never changes. And until your focus shifts, your reality doesn't either. Because even when nothing is actually wrong in this exact moment, their thoughts are constantly scanning for what's wrong or what could be wrong, right? And when that's where your attention lives, that's where your life stays. And maybe that sounds a little harsh, but it's true. And truth is kindness, like I said a little earlier. So that's what I'm here to give you. And then from that stuck state that you're stuck in, right? You don't create, you don't expand, you don't move forward in your life. All your muscles are tensed, your breath is held, you manage, you survive. You live constantly from that state of fear of impending doom. Now compare that to what happens when you deliberately shift your focus. And it's not by pretending that everything is perfect, not by bypassing your current reality, but by choosing intentionally to place your attention on what is working. And there is something working in all of our lives, even when everything's not perfect. So train yourself to notice what is actually really good in your life. Because even when things are really hard, we can always find something that is really good. So what can you appreciate right now? What can you be truly grateful for right now? In what ways are you already being supported by other people, by life? That's when you move into what I call your unstoppable state. That's when breathe a sigh of relief, your body softens, your muscles stop being tense, your belly's not quite as tight, your breath feels easier, your thinking is clearer, and then suddenly you're not reacting to life anymore. You're responding to it. Same circumstances, different internal state, completely different outcomes. And this is why complaining feels so freaking justified, but it costs so damn much because it feels like truth-telling when it is actually just pattern rehearsal. And the more you rehearse it, the more familiar it becomes. It's your set point. The more automatic it becomes, the more it feels like this is just who I am. And honestly, every time I hear that, this is just who I am, I kind of smile because it reminds me of this guy that I dated briefly. And when I say briefly, I mean very briefly. He was just grumpy all the time. All the time he was grumpy. And because of that, my nervous system was just constantly on edge when I was around him. And he would say things like, I am who I am. You can't change the personality someone was born with. Or he would say, I'm just impatient. That's just how I am. And like he believed that. He really believed that. Those weren't personality traits. Those were beliefs. And when I told him, happiness is really important to me, he looked at me in this really grumpy, defensive tone, and he said, well, I'm happy enough. Heavy emphasis on enough. And I remember thinking, wow, that's a choice. And not one I'm interested in making. Thank you very much. Because he genuinely didn't see that happiness was something you could choose, something you could practice, something you could cultivate. So I didn't stay around in that episode very long, but the whole experience stuck with me because it's such a clear example of how easy it is to confuse identity with conditioning, right? People mistake familiar emotional states for just who I am. When in reality, it's just what they've been practicing for a really long time, probably their entire life. And most of the time, they just don't even realize they're practicing anything at all. Until one day, you take a step back and you finally see it. It's like your eyes are finally open. You've been training yourself to expect disappointment, expect people to be against you, instead of training yourself to recognize opportunity. And the moment you see that, you just can't unsee it. And this is why also for so many people, traditional talk therapy doesn't actually create lasting change. They're in it for years, right? And I want to be really clear here, because this is tricky territory, that this is not a knock on therapy. Therapy can be incredibly helpful for awareness, for validation, understanding your past. But here's where it oftentimes falls short. A lot of people spend years in therapy retelling the same stories, replaying the same experience, reinforcing the same meanings that they've attached to those experiences. And while validation can feel really comforting in the moment, your nervous system doesn't hear validation. It hears repetition. So every week when you're in this session, that same story gets rehearsed. The emotional charge stays alive. Stuckness stays. And it's not because the therapist is doing anything wrong, but because the focus never shifts from what happened to me to what meaning am I choosing to attach to this experience. And I see this pattern over and over again with so many of the clients that I work with in my functional health practice. People who have done years of therapy. They understand their trauma. They know that their trauma is at the root of their struggles, but they're still stuck. They're still looping in like one of those, those revolving doors at an airport. It's like they're going round and round and round in this door, right? And then they learn this work. They learn how their thoughts, their focus, and the meaning that they're assigning to their experiences are keeping them in that stuck state. So they stop rehearsing the past. They stop feeding the story. They stop using every single conversation as a processing session. And for the first time, their focus changes. They realize that by focusing on things that they want rather than things from the past that they can't change, they actually start moving forward. And it's not because the past disappeared, you can't change that, but because it no longer had the microphone of their life. And I want to pause here for just a second because this is something I genuinely believe. I believe that every single challenge that we go through in our lives, even the ones that just feel absolutely unbearable when we're in them, is somehow for us. And, this can be perceived as a toxic, everything happens for a reason way, or a, bypassy, silver lining, way too soon kind of thing, but it's not. Think about it this way. It's that what happens to us over time shapes us, teaches us, brings us into that next version of who we're meant to be. And when I look back at my own life, and I've been through a lot, none of it feels random or an accident or, this bad thing happened to me. I lived in a childhood of abject poverty. I was the weird, dirty kid at school. I was rejected by kids. I had a mother who was mentally ill and abusive and emotionally unsafe, and an abusive alcoholic father. My son was nearly killed in a bad car accident. My husband took his own life. Every one of those experiences was brutal when I was living in it. I would never wish them on anyone. But they also shaped me, made me who I am today. They gave me depth and compassion and resilience. They gave me what are now my greatest strengths, what I call my superpowers. None of who I am today, none of the work I do helping people all over the world, none of how I see people or hold space for them would exist without those experiences. And this is where perspective matters so much, because the people who stay stuck, they're not the ones who have been through the hardest things. They're the ones who keep giving the past the microphone. And the people who move forward aren't the ones who have always had it easy. Sometimes they've been through the hardest shit. They're the ones who have learned how to change their focus and how to extract meaning instead of reliving the pain. How to use their story as fuel instead of a freaking cage. That's the shift. That's the work. And this is exactly why complaining keeps you stuck. Because every time you complain, you are handing the microphone right back to the problem. And the problem is never the problem. The problem is the meaning that you are attaching to the situation. You are rehearsing the story. You are feeding the pattern. You are focusing on what you don't want. And whatever you focus on grows. Complaining does not move you forward. It digs the hole deeper. But the moment you notice it, the moment you catch yourself mid-complaint, you have a choice. You can keep digging that hole, or you can pause and climb. You can shift your focus. You can choose a different thought. You can ask yourself, what do I actually want to create here? And no, this does not mean that you are never frustrated about anything, right? It doesn't mean you always pretend that everything is just perfect. It just means that you stop letting frustration run your life. Because the life you want, the health you want, the relationships you want, the freedom you want, the income you want, doesn't come from focusing on what's wrong. It comes from learning how to place your attention on what you want to grow. And once you see that, once you really see it, you can't unsee it. And before I wrap this up, I want to say this. I don't know where you are right now, what season of life you're in. But if you're here and you're listening to this, you didn't find it by accident. You're part of this conversation for a reason. And even if things don't feel perfect yet with your health, your relationships, your work, your finances, or just your life in general, just know that things are already shifting. And I know that because you found this episode. So be gentle with yourself, trust what your awareness is showing you, and trust that small shifts in focus can create massive changes for you over time. I love you. I really do mean that. And if this resonates with you and you want to go deeper, I've linked some resources down below to support you. And I'm so grateful that you're here learning, growing, and doing this work with me. So if you're listening on one of the audio platforms, make sure you're subscribed and leave me a review. It really does help this message reach the people who truly need it the most. And if you're watching on YouTube, please drop a comment down below and let me know what landed for you in this episode. I read every single one of them. And please, please share this with someone you know would love this conversation as well. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you. Thank you for growing with me. And I'll see you in the next episode.